First of all, I want to say that this part here is completely optional, because if we look at the reference image, you will see that the only difference between the text you have now and this one is there are two letters rotated, so there's some customization and some letter spacing here. But to be able to do that, let me switch back, you will have to convert this object to something different and to make some more adjustments, and this is getting a little bit more technical. So if you're not feeling maybe up to it and you're really new to this 3D space and 3D software thing, I think you can move on to the next chapter and continue with some basic modeling of the objects, and maybe you can then come back later and finish this more technical part with converting the text object into model and to make these little adjustment. So it's totally up to you. If you feel like it, you want to follow these steps, just go ahead and follow. If you feel a little bit overwhelmed with the UI and with all of the functions of the software, maybe just skip this part and move on to the modeling, and then you can come back later and rotate those letters and make those text adjustments that I will show in this chapter. Now we'll go ahead and clean up this text a little bit to create some variation. And if we look at the render, you can see that the T and R are rotated here a little bit, and to be able to do this, we'll have to do some steps. They will be quite technical, but if any point you feel too overwhelmed with this, just remember that these are just steps that are necessary to do if you're not satisfied with the text like this, but you want to do those small variation. So first of all, to be able to manipulate the letters individually, we will need to convert the text to mesh. And if you remember from the sushi episode, the mesh are those basic objects that have vertices and edges and faces, and you can manipulate them. The text right now is just some representation of the font file, and the rendering is done automatically for us. So if we go into the edit mode, we can just write the text. But we want to manipulate this, and for that we need to do conversion. So just select these two objects, go to the object, convert to, and you can see there's an options to convert to mesh. So click that, and right now if you go to the edit mode, you can see that this is now a mesh object instead of a text object. But when you do a conversion like this, Blender is splitting the letters into multiple mesh parts, and you don't have to repeat this, but if I click the vertex here and move it, you will see that underneath there was another one. So there are some overlapping vertices, and that's why we could see those sharp edges on those letters. But this itself isn't very good, and it may cause some problems later. So right now we need to eliminate those double vertices, and that's basically very easy to do. So just follow along, go to the select all, and now go to vertex, merge vertices, and by distance. And down here you will see message removed 1840 vertices. So there were that many double vertices after the conversion there. So this is just a cleanup step, and sometimes it's good to do these things with the precaution. If you're manipulating the meshes and doing something, sometimes you will create these double vertices accidentally. So it's good to remember this command where you can go to the vertex, merge by distance, and remove the double geometry. And now one last thing is to go to the object mode and switch this to smooth shading. So right click, and you can see there are two options, shade smooth and shade flat. So change this to shade smooth. And I know this looks awful right now, but it's a necessary step to get to a point where it will look much better than before. And I want to show you the main difference between the smooth and flat shading. So if I right click and click shade flat, you would think that this looks much better, but if you go closer right here, you can see these visible steps. And that's basically Blender shading every polygon, every face at its own, so it's not creating any smooth gradients between these faces. And we obviously want to have it smooth, so that's why we're gonna use smooth shading. But there's one additional step we need to do to make it look like more like this. So again, let's go to the shade smooth, and here under the object data properties, if you not have it active, you can click the green icon here, go to the normals section and enable auto smooth, and do it again for the other object as well. And right now we have the similar result as with the flat shading, but if you look closer, you can see that this is a nice smooth gradient here. So the auto smooth basically uses these angle settings to determine whether it will make the transition between the faces smooth or not. If you select this other object here and go up with the angles maybe over 60 degrees, you will see some changes, like here, well, it crosses the threshold and starts to smooth shade here as well. And if you go over 90 degrees, you will see the result as before, because right now the Blender tries to smooth even those 90 degrees angles here. So let's go back to 30 degrees and we have our desired result. So, and again, if this looks a little bit overwhelming, just remember these simple steps that we have done to get to this point. So that's about the text conversion. And one last thing to do here is to split the letters into separate objects, and that's very easy to do. So again, drag the selection around the text, go into the edit mode, so switch here from object mode to edit mode, go to the select all, and every time you use one of these options here, you can see there's a keyboard shortcut there, so you could easily press A and select all. So let's select all, and now we want to go to mesh, separate, and by loose parts. And what that'll do is basically take the objects that are not connected and separate them into their own objects. So let's click this. Right now we can go to the object mode, and if you now click the single letters, you will see that they're separated and every letter is a single object. But one more thing to note here is the origin point, and that's basically the center of transformation and manipulation of the object. And by separating the text by loose parts like this, we created the separate objects, but they still have the same origin, or rather the origin point at the same place. So whether you click C or R, you will see that the transform gizmos are right here, and that orange point here in the middle is their origin point. And what that means practically is that every transformation by default will happen around this origin point of the object. So if I were to rotate this on the x-axis, you will see it will rotate around that point. And that's not too great to have an origin point so far from the object itself, but it can be easily fixed. So again, just select all, drag a selection around those letters, and right click to get to the context menu, and you have a command here to set origin, and you can choose origin to center of mass. Click that, and immediately you will see that each letter has its own origin point near the center right now. So if you now click the letters, they can be easily manipulated by themselves around their center. We can now go ahead and make these changes. So once again, we'll need to switch to the top view. So click the Z, dot here and select the T letter, and we want to rotate it 45 degrees. So again, just click and hold the blue circle, hold Control, and rotate 45 degrees. If you're not sure, the actual number of the rotation is in the top left corner. You can see there is rotation minus 45 global, and as you're rotating it changes. So yeah, we can do it like this. There are other places where you can see the actual number for the rotation. If you go to the object properties, and you can have this enabled by default, you will see that there is rotation 45 degrees around the Z axis, and as you rotate this you will see it changing. So that's another place where you can see this, or even modify it by entering the numerical value. But let's move on and let's rotate the R too. So click the R with the left mouse button, click and drag the blue circle once again, and let's make another 45 degrees rotation of this letter here. And now I want to create a little bit more space between these letters. So maybe let's look from the perspective. So click and drag the gizmo here and rotate this a little bit. And right now we can just select the create letters. So drag a selection around them. And if you want to add to the selection, just hold Shift and drag again. So like this. And now all of these letters are selected. And I want to use the scale tool, but we can use a special feature of the scale tool that will basically scale only the locations of the objects, not the objects themselves. So let's go here to the options for the transform tool and check affect only locations. And once this is checked, if you now scale on the y-axis, so the little green cube here, you will see that you're not scaling the objects, but only their locations relative to each other. So you are creating a space between them. And in the top left corner, we again see the actual scale we are creating. I can hold Shift to make this a little bit more smooth. And I want to scale this to something like 1.2. So there is some more space between them. And right now we'll need to fix the scale of the more letters a little bit. So again, click the Z here, select these letters, switch to the scale tool here, but don't forget to go to the options and uncheck the locations again, because again we would be only scaling the locations of the letters, and right now I want to scale this. So let's click and drag the circle to match the size of the first word. And we can switch back to the transform tool and maybe move this a little bit so it's better aligned here with the y-axis. And now we can rotate back to the perspective, and remember you can use the middle mouse button for this.